So good. Well, afternoon by now, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen. My name is Sam van Hauwaert, and I work for KIWA, which is a large international testing, inspection and certification organization. So we typically do not come in so much for consultancy and organization, but we do mainly come in for certification of management systems. And in this sense, today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what I think is a very unpopular topic to talk about, but I'd like to talk about how shall we combine corporate and industrial security programs. There's a reason why I'm here. I'm sure you've heard enough of NIS2 already all day. Everybody's been talking about NIS2, but NIS2 is actually the reason why I put forward this specific presentation. Because what we're seeing today is that, we have draft legislations for NIS2 in a number of countries, in all countries. We have final transposed law in about 8 or 9 countries, I believe, now, and a lot of them coming. And what we're seeing there is that, well, basically none of them seem to be pushing forward IEC62443. It seems like it's totally lost in the concept of NIS2, which to me is very strange, because if you look at critical infrastructure, important and essential entities, we're looking at electricity, gas, water, hydrogen, manufacturing, space, medical, all these things that all work with OT systems, and still there's no 62443 standard popping up anywhere. And I guess that actually makes sense. If you look at IEC 62443, it really doesn't do end-to-end security of the entirety of an organization. The standard is specifically designed and made for automation, building automation, and industrial control systems. So it makes sense, I guess, that we're not seeing this one as an actual standard popping up, giving us the assumption of conformity, because we simply don't cover the full scope of NIS2. What are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of local legislation. Belgium has done something with what they call the Cyber Fundamentals Framework. Ireland has adopted that. France is looking at a whole number of ANSI standards. Italy is putting forward their own framework. But us manufacturing companies are typically multinationals. Not always, but a lot of us are multinational. So if we're looking at what are we going to do in a pan-European organization, it seems like ISO 27001 is pretty much the only thing we have going right there. ISO 27001 is currently in 6 or 7 countries. I think that they are specifically mentioned as being a standard offering assumption of conformity. In most of the other draft legislations, we see more vague texts like the European and the acceptance of European and international standards. And I think we're specifically seeing that because they're not ready with the legislation yet. They want to move fast, but they're not convinced of what the approach is. But it is my firm belief that the winner, if we can say it that way, is going to be ISO 27001. Now, we all know this one. I assume we all know this one. In OT, we've been historically talking about something we call the Cybersecurity Management System, the CSMS. And the CSMS, it was good. It was doing the right things. It made perfect sense. We basically started from, business rationale, business objectives, business risk, classification of our systems, to then have a whole process of, well, mainly risk-based activities combined with a scope and organization for security, roles and responsibilities, training, security awareness, and of course, incident management, business continuity, all these things that we need to do. And we did have the final option of a monitor and improving the CSMS, which, as Mike said in introduction, it's always been there, but it's never been something I think that we've been actively working out, we've been actively going for. So yeah, this is how we've always been doing cybersecurity from an industrial point of view. We did the CSMS, the IT guys did ISO 27001, and we pretty much only spoke, I think, when we were trying to open firewall ports between OT and IT or vice versa. Now, ISO 62443-2-1 was reviewed in 2024, and there's this one clause which, for me, has changed my view on ISO 62443. Org 1.1 simply says, if the asset owner, that would be us, has an ISMS, an information security management system, such as ISO 27001, the asset owners shall coordinate the IACS security program with the ISMS. And that's a shall statement. So if you are working in an organization that's in manufacturing, gas, water, electricity, utilities, name it, that has an industrial components, our very own standard now says we must integrate with the IT guys. Now that's a weird statement. That's a bold statement, but they also offer some options out there for a BART. Then they reduce the statement where practical. So there's a little bit of reducing that shall statements. We also need to recognize that we have different objectives, different security objectives, definitely different safety objectives, and even business objectives can be different between, an industrial control system and, let's say, SharePoint. So, why did they do this? Why did we stop using our own system? And it makes sense. First of all, if you look again at what it says here, I mean, our scope, organization for security, staff and awareness, business continuity, policies, if you want, conformance, KPIs, continuous improvement. These are things we were both doing. We were both duplicating. And then most importantly, we were both doing a completely different approach to risk management. And that is the essential part of security. Security is about the appropriate risk. So I think it makes sense that we talk about deduplication of work, and that actually makes perfect sense. I think the goal was also to improve collaboration at an organizational level. And I think the last one, and maybe even the most important one, is just about aligning business objectives. I mean, security should not be about my system. Security should not be about just OT. Security should not be about just IT. It should not be about purchasing. Security should be an enabler for our business objectives. And in that sense, I do believe that ISA has done the right thing. That statement that we should integrate is the right statement. I do want to spend one or two slides just talking about ISO 27001, because typically us automation people are not, we know this thing and we've heard about this thing, and we probably have had IT guys bugging us about all kinds of things like, why aren't your servers patched, and why are you not updating, and why don't you do this, and why don't you do this the way we do it? We need to reboot the system and we can't because of you. All these things are what we typically know about IT, but we don't know why. ISO 27001 is nothing more than an information security management system. Remember, we called ours the cybersecurity management system, and that word management system comes back. Management systems are really not about technology. They're about people, they're about processes, then they're about technology. But we really, in a management system, we are mainly looking at people, process, and a risk-based approach. So in that sense, for me, the CSMS from 62443 and ISO 27001 are not at all counterintuitive. They have the same approach, they have the same way of working, they have the same process-oriented way of getting to security. Then why is everybody saying ISO 27001 won't work? Well, I would say it's mainly because of ISO 27002. So ISO 27001 is our management system. That is what we certify against. But ISO 27001 also requires us to look at ISO 27002. And 27002 is basically a long list of controls, technical controls. You shall have a firewall, you shall have identification authentication, you will look at all these technical requirements, and technical doesn't always mean IT. It can be human resource, it can be purchasing, it can be many other things, but we're looking at all these controls. Those are very IT oriented. Sure, they are very IT oriented, but ISO 27001 doesn't even say that we have to use 27002. It does, however, say that we have to evaluate the use of ISO 27002, but ISO 27001 by itself is nothing but a management system. And if you do an ISO 27001 implementation with the goal of being certified, if you are an essential entity under NIS2, that's probably what you're going to be doing if you're working internationally, then you will be certified against ISO 27001. You will not be certified against 27002. So basically, what I'm trying to say is ISO 27001 is not a blocking factor for what we do. It is nothing but a management system that has a huge amount of freedom based on risk management. Now, if you look at the core elements of ISO 27001, we're looking at, leadership commitment, involvement of the leadership, knowing your organization, understanding your organization, knowing your business objectives. It's about training. It's about awareness. It is all the time about risk management. Constantly talks about risk management, and it ends with the idea of having KPIs, being able to measure your level of security, and then do it all over again. The plan, do, check, act cycle. Just continuous improvement, continuously redo everything until you get better and better and better and more mature. And the part security controls is, I'm not going to say just a small part of this, but it basically is just an annex. So how does it look like? This is weird, right? We just talked about this, right? ISO 27001 being our management system, ISO 27002 being a control set. And I happen to know of another great control set. ISO 62443-3-3 is an awesome control set. It's a very good list, very applicable to us. And as I said, ISO 27001 does not necessarily oblige you to use only 27002. It allows you to use other control sets. It can be a NIST control set. It can be, it can be a CIS control set, but it can also be a 62443 control set. So what we basically said now is we're still going to be looking at this ISO 27001 thing. So this management system, this process-oriented way where we look at leadership, about planning, about resource, about operations, about performance evaluation, about continuous improvement, about the context of our organization, all these things that we were basically already doing on our CSMS. We were looking at the same things. We also were looking at, does our leadership support us? Do we have the resources? Do we know our roles and responsibilities? Who will approve it? How will we be doing risk management? All these things are basically the same. So ISO 62443-2-1 now has, instead of a whole own CSMS, they have 7 what they call security program elements that you should integrate into your management system. So, we have a part under ISO 27001, we have a part context of the organization and leadership, which is about leadership, commitment, and organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Well, we just call that organizational security measures. Is it different? Probably. It might not be the CISO being responsible for everything. Maybe we will have somebody responsible in OT for OT risks. It might not be the same roles, it might not be the same people, it definitely won't be in the same time frames, but basically we're not saying anything in the security program elements that we're not really already doing. So ISO 27001 and the old 62443-2-1, they are very complementary. We'll look at ISO 27002 for our corporate environment. We'll look at 62443, especially -3-3 for our control set for our OT environments. And I guess that all sounds fine, right? How do we do this? Now, how do you practically do this? I think it starts with having a description about what OT and IT is. So if you look at ISO 27001, one of the first documents that you will be looking at is the information security context requirements and scope. And in that context, requirements and scope, it's going to say these products are in scope, these departments, these location, development is or is not in scope. It's going to define the scope of your ISO 27001. Now, within that definition, I think we clearly need to state what OT means for us, because it's easy to say IT is 27002 and OT is 62443, but if we don't make a very clear definition, it won't work within the management system. I have a definition here for a specific company, but it can be anything. It's going to be different for everybody. And in this specific case, we're more looking at the people, process, and technology, at the physical part. If we're moving something, if we're changing something, it's OT. That can be an easy way out. For another company, it can be everything involved in electricity generation, for example. But we need to make that scope for ourselves applicable for our organization and clearly define it. We'll also have to label them. Whenever I have an asset or a system or a process or a person or a role that's part of my management system, I will need to give that a label. Is this for the entire organization? Is this only for IT or is this only for OT? And I know this sounds simple, but if we don't do this, the management system will fail. It needs to be very clear, when are we using which part of our standards? Now, a second part I'd like to talk about is, typically both ISO 62443 2-1, the old version, the CSMS, as ISO 27001, have a concept of policies and procedures. Both in IT and in OT, we see that we are writing very extensive policies. We like to say everything in a policy, right? This technology, this detail, this encryption, this that. We'd like to be very specific in what we put in our policies. And I believe that's counterintuitive. Regardless if you have a CSMS or an ISMS or a unified management system, policies are a statement document that must be approved by senior management. For me, they should not say anything specific. So an example I gave you here about the network security policy, for me, it should just say, ooh, we will protect our networks the best way we can. Maybe a tiny little bit more than that. But that's what a policy should be like. And then my suggestion is, this is how I do it. There's different approaches. Some people write a network security policy that has both an IT section and an IT and an OT section in it. I prefer to call it a standard, so it's a sub-document of the policy. So this network policy will be very generic, and it will refer to an IT standard and an OT standard, and it could even, if you want, to refer to a facility standard at a later point in time. But so I will say, for IT, it's going to be about confidentiality and sensitive data, the sensitive data. For OT, we're going to be talking about safety system, remote access, mobile system, removable wireless system, zones and so we can have all that techie stuff, all that stuff we want, and all these technical details, we can have that in a standard, giving us enormous freedom in what we do, because a standard is a document that can be approved within either OT or IT, depending on what team it is in. And it doesn't have to go back to that senior management. You don't have to go back to the board. You don't have to go back to that management team. Your management team knows that you want to be doing the best thing you can for network security, and we'll do it this way for IT, and we'll do it partially a different way for OT, for example. Risk management. Management systems are about risk. If we're not looking at risk, we shouldn't be doing anything else. Neither ISO 27001 nor 62443 say anything about what methodology you should be using. And I know people disagree with me on this one for a part, but I truly believe we should be doing the same thing. Not 100% the same thing, but our matrix should look the same. Whatever is green in IT should be green in OT. Whatever is orange in IT should be orange in OT. Whatever is red in IT should be red in OT. These values need to say the same thing. If I go to my management team, if I go to senior management, and they know that an 8 is an unacceptable risk, then that should be the case everywhere. 8 is unacceptable, 6 is 4 is okay. That should be something that they know. We want them to be able to relate to the same numbers. So for me, that means that we do, at the very least, the initial risk assessments in a very similar way, with the same likelihood, same scale, the same consequence scale. We do that in the same way. We have a way of calculating security levels. I mean, we know if we take our risk divided by our total risk, we get to our security level. We have these systems to calculate this. So having the same risk approach makes sense, not because we want it to be like that, but we want to be able to talk to our management about budget, about risks, about tolerance, about what we need, resource we need to fix that in a way they understand. We as automation people, we still have that detailed risk assessment, and that's our real risk assessment. I mean, the initial risk assessment, we define zones and conduits, we define unmitigated risk so we can get to a security level. The real risk assessment for us is the detailed risk. That will we'll start designing, that's where we'll start working, that's where we look at earlier LOPAs and HAZOPs and whatever we have already done for information. So keep that detailed risk assessment, embrace it, do it the way we've always done it. Make that the basis for your architecture, your design, your mitigations, your processes. But I believe we should get a unified, nicely colored green, orange, red, whatever we do in your company, that is the same for management to understand. And not risk is alike. Even if we use this same likelihood and consequence, we should look at consequence differently. The way I try and do is I try and give an impact value to my system. So I know we don't want to talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I know we want to say that we're about safety and reliability and productivity, and we are right. But reality is we can map it to each other. I mean, we want to go to our management with an approach that they know, that they understand, that they've already seen from IT. So, I mean, I do believe in that initial risk assessment. We will have to be looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But, I got a generic mesh here, a generic HR server, it doesn't matter. But they don't need the same weight. For my mesh server, availability and integrity are my core values. There's nothing or little confidential in there for me. I will give that a different weight. These values will be less important when they're about confidentiality. But when we're talking about HR servers, well, honestly, if it's down for 2 days, as long as I can pay them end of the month, it's probably not the end of the world. But confidentiality and even integrity in part will matter to me here. So I think we have to look at in our impact values, we have to give a weight to what we find important in the CIA triad, because that allows us to bring our message of integrity and availability are more important to us than confidentiality in a very similar way. I'm gonna have to go faster. I'm probably not on time, so I'll go a little bit faster. The essential part, what an author will be looking at, the first thing an author will ask you if he's looking at ISO 27001, he will ask you for your statement of applicability. And basically, your statement of applicability is everything you say you will be doing and why you will be doing it. We should keep that. We should get all of our 62443 controls in there at all security levels. That's going to be a long list, but get them all in there. And what I typically do is I add a column to my statement of applicability saying where it applies. My policies, that applies for everybody. And if we're looking at NIST 2, it's a legal requirement for me, so I have to do it. Human resource security, it's not going to be different. It's a legal requirement. If I work in defense, it might be contractual requirements. So these are things we have to be doing. Asset management in the same way. The asset management policy can be the same. We're going to need an ownership of assets. We're going to need the risk owner. We're going to need all these things, but they're really not different for OT and IT. But then nothing stops us from making specific OT controls. Session log being a typical example. Session log, we've done a risk analysis. The result of this risk analysis is that for OT, we're going to do it different. If there's an emergency stop, if there's safety systems involved, it might be that not having a session log is a legal requirement. So we will document these things in our statement of applicability. And when an auditor comes in, he will understand, what we're doing for 62443 for OT, what are we doing for 27001 for IT, and what is maybe generic for both. And that's what we will be audited on. I'm almost there. Sorry, guys. Sorry for running a little bit late. The end result, and this is the goal. The goal is having one single management system that we can certify, because that's what we're doing here, right? We're looking about NIS2 important entities. We're talking about maybe clients or suppliers or partners that require an ISO 27001 certificate. So we're looking at a certified, unified management system with both. So the certificate will say 27001, but we will not have forgotten why we need to do it, why we are doing these things. So we will definitely be looking at everything from 62443 to specifically integrate into that. Then a final conclusion for me, it works. It can be done. It's not counterintuitive. It's not contradiction. It's not a contradiction. They can work, but, and I think that's very important, make sure your IT guys are trained in industrial security. Also, make sure that you guys are trained in 27001 and start that collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.